doing so. Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
Questions and comments. The Honourable Parliamentary Secretary to the Minister of Democratic Institutions.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
First reading, Bill C-33, and I wonder if he can give me any sense, because being very candid, the member for Perth Wellington and I work together at various committees on electoral reform, and I think he's a sterling fellow, but I don't want to put him on the spot on behalf of his whole party. Bill C-33 is trying to repair a lot of what many of us in the opposition at the time felt was damage to our electoral system. Does he know the current intention and how he personally feels about how he'll vote on Bill C-33?
The Honourable Member for Perth Wellington.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I'd like to thank my friend from Saanich Gulf Islands for her very kind words. Very much appreciate that. Where is Bill C-33? I think that's the million-dollar question. Introduced in November 2016, and yet here it is stalled. There's been no debate. There's been no debate at second reading. It hasn't even got to the point that we can even get to committee and discuss it. You know, certainly our party is open to debating Bill C-33, but we haven't even been given the chance to debate it. Here it is, sitting at second reading, unmoved, unloved, completely stalled, Mr. Speaker. I would have to ask the government, where's Bill C-33? And where are so many other bills that they have introduced and yet have let sit stagnant on the order paper, Mr. Speaker?
Resuming debate. Please, the débat. The Honourable Member for St. John's East.
Thank you very much, Mr. Speaker. I rise today to speak to Bill C-50, an act to amend the Canada Elections Act, political financing. This bill proposes amending the Canada Elections Act to bring an unprecedented level of openness and transparency to federal political fundraisers. The legislation is just one of many steps that we are taking as a government to raise the bar on transparency, accountability, and integrity of our public institutions and the democratic process. Mr. Speaker, 2017 marks the 35th anniversary of the Charter of Rights and Freedoms, which was signed on a blustery day in April on the front lawn of Parliament, just a few steps from where we are right now. Canadians cherish our Charter, and rightly so. It is a model for democracies around the world. Section 3 of the Charter guarantees every citizen the right to vote and to run in an election. This fundamental democratic right, guaranteed to all Canadians, is one of our most cherished civic rights. The simple act of voting is an exercise of democratic freedom that unites all of us as Canadians. The Charter of Rights and Freedoms also enshrines the freedoms of association and expression. Section 2 of the Charter has been interpreted to include the right of Canadian citizens and permanent residents to make a donation to a party and to participate in fundraising activities. Of course, these rights are both subject to the reasonable limitations that might be imposed in a free and democratic society. Political parties represent a vital part of our democratic system. They unite people from different parts of the country with a variety of different perspectives and backgrounds and experiences. Parties mobilize ordinary citizens to champion policies and ideas, and they foster the kind of vigorous public debate about ideas that is at the heart of our healthy democracy. Voting in an election for a candidate is one of the ways Canadians play an active and engaged role in this society. We see this as an opportunity to make our country a better place for our children and our grandchildren. Some Canadians even choose to work or volunteer in a political party or a candidate's campaign, and for many of us here in this room, we probably know a few people that don't. We engage all of our friends and family to help us in our political activities, and many of the people we meet are either our volunteers or people who work against us in campaigns. But it's true that it's a broad expanse of the Canadian population who participates in political activity at the municipal, provincial, and also here at the federal level. But not everyone has the time or inclination to become involved in politics in that respect. Still, they may want to have their voices heard. So for many Canadians, making a financial contribution to a political campaign is a meaningful way for them to play a direct role in our democracy. It is an important form of democratic expression. Choosing to financially support a political party or a candidate is something we must continue to uphold and protect. Everyone in this place knows that donations given by people who believe in us, who believe in what we stand for and what our parties stand for, help make our work possible. And we must continue to ensure that Canadians are free to contribute to political parties and candidates openly and transparently. It bears noting that Canada is known around the world for the rigour of its political financing regime. Donations from corporations and from unions are prohibited under the existing legislation. And to further level the playing field, there are strict limits on the contributions an individual can make. Canadian citizens and permanent residents contribute a maximum this year of $1,575 to each registered party. They can donate a total of $1,575 to the leadership contestants in a particular contest. And in addition, they can donate a total of $1,575 to contestants for nomination, candidates, and or riding associations of each registered party. Contributions are reported to Elections Canada, and the name, municipality, province, and postal code of those who contribute more than $200 are posted online. Bill C-50 would build on this existing regime so that when a fundraising event requires an attendee to contribute or pay a ticket price totaling more than $200, the name and partial address of each attendee, with certain exceptions, will be published online. The exceptions are youth under 18, volunteers, event staff, media, someone assisting a person with a disability, and support staff for a minister or party leader in attendance. Canadians take political financing seriously. There are significant consequences for disobeying the law, and that is why currently the Elections Canada Act provides tough sanctions for those who break the rules. Though Canadians can be proud of our already strict regulations for political financing, we recognize that they have a right to know even more, and perhaps in a more timely fashion, when it comes to political fundraising events. Bill C-50 aims to provide Canadians with more and quicker information about political financing events in order to continue to enhance trust and confidence in our democratic institutions. If passed, C-50 would allow Canadians to learn when a political fundraiser has a ticket price or requires contributions above $200, that it is happening and who attended. The legislation would apply to all fundraising activities attended by cabinet ministers, including the Prime Minister, party leaders, and leadership contestants that meet these criteria. This provision also applies to appreciation events for donors to a political party or contestant. This legislation would only apply to parties with a seat in the House of Commons. It would require parties to advertise fundraising events at least 5 days in advance. Canadians would know about a political fundraiser before the event takes place, giving them the opportunity to inquire about a ticket if they so choose. Bill C-50 would also give journalists the ability to determine when and where fundraisers are happening. At the same time, political parties would retain the flexibility to set their own rules for providing media access and accreditation. Parties would be required to report the names and partial addresses of attendees to Elections Canada within 30 days of the event. That information would then become public in a much more timely fashion than currently is the case. The bill would also introduce new offences in Canada's Election Act for those who don't respect the rules and require the return of any money collected at the event. These sanctions would apply to political parties and event organizers rather than the senior political leaders invited to the events. We propose a maximum $1,000 fine on summary conviction for offences introduced under Bill C-50, and of course this is in addition to returning the funds raised. This new level of transparency will further enhance Canadians' trust in the government, and that's good for everyone. If passed, Bill C-50 would deliver on the government's promise to bring greater transparency to Canada's political financing system and thus strengthen our democratic institutions. And as I have said, this is just one of the efforts that we're putting into place. The government is also taking action to increase voter participation and enhance the integrity of elections through Bill C-33, an act to amend the Elections Act. And the government has partnered with the Communications Security Establishment to protect democracy from cyber threats. While we know that Canadians have confidence in our democracy, we recognize that there's always room for improvement, and shining a light on political fundraising activities as and when they happen builds upon our already strong and robust system for political financing in Canada and should be welcomed by everyone in this House. Thank you.
Questions and comments? Question commentaire, the honourable member for Saskatoon West.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker, and I want to thank my colleague for his comments. And I'm hoping that, Mr. Speaker, what I'm going to say doesn't sound sort of a bit tongue-in-cheek or a bit cheeky, I guess. But in my office, I have social work interns come in, and they're able to do a practicum in my office because I am a social worker. That's what I did before I became a parliamentarian. And part of that conversation I have with those students is the difference between Parliament and government. because often community members sort of confuse the two. You know, what's a minister? They're in the government. A member of parliament is in parliament. And I guess what I'm having a hard time here with the opposition side, the opposite side, pardon me, its response to this bill is blurring the lines between what we're talking about, and that is we're talking about cash for access for government ministers. To me, that's a whole different conversation than when we're talking about political financing and party leaders and candidates having fundraisers. Government ministers, from how I feel, government ministers should not be involved in political financing. People should not be allowed to pay a certain amount of money to be able to have access to a government minister. And I just want to hear his comments about the distinction between those roles. Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
The honourable member for St. John's East.
Thank you very much. I'd like to thank the member for a question. It's an excellent one. Obviously, there are roles that relate to conflict of interest and ethics, and those are dealt with under that Act. What the changes we're talking about today are ones which relate to changes to political financing. Her question is one that certainly should come up in any review of the conflict of interest ethics considerations. With respect to how these changes will help Canadians by providing them more transparency, and maybe I can just sort of walk through the process. Under the current rules, if someone donates $200 to a political party, that amount and these information, the names, are already going to be collected, ultimately disclosed to Canada, Elections Canada, and then published at some point in time 6 to 9 months after the end of the fiscal year. And it makes it difficult then for Canadians to know at and when, at the time, whether or not people are attending these events, who those people might be, and to make up their own determination as to whether or not anything improper has occurred or could be occurring. The changes that we're putting in now require that when these fundraisers take place, this information will be made available to the media in advance, so the media will know where and when the events are taking place so that they can attend if they're accredited, and they can report on the attendance at the event. And then, of course, the information will be compiled and provided to Elections Canada within 30 days of the event so that Canadians can see who attended. And it will be up to Canadians then, in addition to any other ethics considerations that might fall under a separate regime, Canadians will then be able to make up their own mind. Do we feel that this is appropriate? Do we continue to have faith and trust in our system? And I believe they will, because they'll have the information at their fingertips, and the light of transparency will render it clean. Thank you.
Questions and comments. The honourable member for Perth Wellington.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker, and I want to thank the member from St. John's East for his question, or for his speech, I mean. And I'm not sure why he's not the government minister for Newfoundland and Labrador. I think he'd make a great minister representing his province. But under the legislation, the money that is gained through an illegal fundraiser has to be paid back. So I'd like to ask the member if, along a similar vein, a trip is taken to an island and the ethics commissioner finds it to be illegal, whether or not that $215,000 should also be paid back to the taxpayers.
Member for St. John's East.
Okay, well, I'll take the first question first. The Minister for Veterans Affairs and the Associate Minister for National Defence is a fantastic, hard-working individual, and he has certainly earned his place to sit in Cabinet. He represents Newfoundland and Labrador very well. With respect to the second question as to costs assumed and controlled by a separate level of government that determines the Prime Minister's safety, we all want the Prime Minister, regardless of what party he or she is in, to be safe and protected, and to have those safety and security considerations managed by the RCMP, which they do. And the Prime Minister has followed the rules set out. He's apologized, and he suffers the consequences in public life of having made a mistake. Thank you.